To be honest, I never actually say this, but being a man is hard sometimes. Like, it can be very, very tough, and some of the things that you see can make it seem like it's a very, very tough thing to be. But at the same time, one of the more interesting things is the babes. Not just some of the things that the babes do, but even talking about the babes. But I will get to that because that is mostly what makes up this episode. But before I get into any of those perils, I want to bring up a story that I found to be particularly interesting. Now, about 2-3 days ago, 3 mermaids in California saved a drowning scuba diver while participating in a nearby mermaid training course. And hold up, something doesn't make sense here. Are they actually mermaids like Aquaman, Ariel type shit? Or are they training to be mermaids, or are they transitioning? Because honestly, I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this, because are these actual mermaids? Now, don't get me wrong. The idea of being picked up by a couple of fine gals, when you're drowning, first of all, you start thinking that you're in heaven. Then at some point you realize, oh shit, heaven was never preached as something that had fine babes and tails, because how do you get to the booty? Those are some of the things that I'd be worrying about. Because the fact that there were actual mermaid women that picked him up was probably a little profound, because I'm trying to think about how if I was to go for a trip to the US of A, I'm in Cali, and I decide to, go for a swim and I drown, and a couple of fine babes in mermaid looking costumes decided to pick me up, I'd be a little bit suspicious of whether I'm in Cali or whether I'm in heaven. Plus also trying to tell that story to people might be a little bit hard, because people would not believe you for shit. Although, let me just read the story for you for a little bit. So, 3 mermaids off the coast of California have rescued a drowning diver, quoting that they are, quote unquote, not just pretty tails and nails. The mermaids were participating in a nearby mermaid training course when they spotted the unconscious diver and took action, saving his life. These are actual people that refer to themselves as mermaids. When you get to the point where you're we're not just pretty tails and nails. Some of us like toes, and this is very, very misleading information. But before I got on to recording, while I was prepping for this, I decided to actually go and do a little bit of research. Now, I stumbled onto an article of a mermaid man, and it says, and I quote, 10 years after he first tried on the set piece in his apartment, Laughlin, 40 years old, is a full-time merman, part of a hub of mermaid enthusiasts in Southern California who inhabit personas that express everything from a yearning for childhood play and entertainment to environmental advocacy and gender identity. End quote. So essentially, these are actual people that believe in being a mermaid. Okay. I guess the whole fantasy of me getting head from, a human fish is kind of not going to happen, considering that I was being told a fish's head is one of the best parts of a fish. But maybe I kind of got that whole statement wrong. But at least what I do know that I didn't get wrong was this podcast, which I probably should have started in a more typical fashion, where I start by saying, welcome to Breaktime on West Side, your number 1 Breaktime podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who does not want his girlfriend to be a mermaid, because I want to tear that ass up and not have to deal with the scales in between. Although, now that I think about it, if I do dump her, then technically there will be plenty of fish in the sea. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. The show is Tweetstreet, the show where we take a deep dive into Twitter, pull up a couple of tweets and break them down a little bit. Now, as usual, if you know the drill, then you can repeat it after me. If you don't know the drill, it's okay, I'ma say it. And if you know the drill but you don't want to say it, it's still okay, because it relates to how it is that you can contribute to the making of these episodes by submitting the many tweets that you see on social media platforms, not just Twitter. And it's a very simple drill. It almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. On Facebook and on IG, if it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, and so on, then the place to send it to is the DMs of @Breaktime on Westside on either Facebook or on IG, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. Now, I have to be very honest, I actually do want to do about 4 tweets. Normally I do about 3, but you know what, I was feeling a little bit different today. So I'll try and brush through most of what I have to talk about before I get into the tweets real quick. Now, first of all, it has been confirmed that the world now has over 8 billion people. This was a confirmation that was made this week, and I'm gonna be very honest, I feel like we already crossed 8 billion a long time ago. If we didn't have a lot of the war in Russia and Ukraine, and if Future and Elon Musk actually confirmed the number of kids that they had, we'd have probably hit 8 billion people by probably around March, if not earlier than that. But either way, it is good that we are now confirmed to be over 8 billion. The only problem is, considering that most of us are actually adults as opposed to kids, we have a looming population crisis. It's just that people don't want to talk about it, or people don't want to acknowledge that such a thing exists, especially when you have 8 billion people. But considering that Nick Cannon, Future, and Elon Musk have been addressing the issue, I don't think it'll be a looming crisis for very long, so I will leave that one aside. Now, according to a report by Bloomberg Business, apparently Moet is running out of champagne as demand for the champagne soars. Now, according to the Moet Hennessy CEO Philippe Chaus, they say that the global reopening has released pent-up demand, with stocks of some top champagnes likely to remain low until the new year. End quote. Now, essentially what they're trying to say is, because COVID restrictions have been released and people have been told you can go outside for I don't know how long, apparently supply of Moet is low, of which I don't know, maybe I could have blamed this on Nigerians and celebrating shit, or I could have blamed it on rappers, but this is absolute bullshit. Rappers and Nigerians have been celebrating with Moet for a very long time. And COVID restrictions were sort of pulled down a while ago, like maybe 18 months ago or some shit for people. Like, for us to say that they're running low on supply now, this sounds like some manufactured bullshit. Like, I was even checking the comments of this story on IG, and people were like, you know what, I live around the Champagne region in, I think it was France, and stocks are good. So this is absolute bull. And yes, maybe you can argue that these guys only go for the highest quality, which is bull. Champagne actually comes from the lowest quality of grapes. But to think about someone saying that there's a shortage of champagne, like, that's just bull. This is someone just trying to drive up demand so that they can hike up the prices and shit. Because what better way to increase demand than to actually create an artificial demand that you've manufactured so that people think that there's a shortage? Because let's be honest, I don't think there's a shortage. And even with the Nigerians and the superstars popping bottles and shit, and with all the celebrations, including Kenya's elections and everything, I do not think people are actually buying that much more champagne. I actually feel like it might be decreasing with the rise of inflation. So to some degree, maybe this is his way of fighting inflation. I don't know. Either way, it just sounds like absolute bull. And I do not think it deserves the light of day. So I will leave it at that, and I will move it on to the tweets. But before I get to that, ladies and gentlemen, do you ever wish you or your man's beard game went up? Do you ever dream of feeling a full beard? Do you simply want a beard that looks and smells good? If you said yes to some or all of the above, Accentu is the experience for you or your man. Their amazing beard oil is set to revolutionize the market through the use of tested and approved organic ingredients that will make the No Shave November squad not only look ruggedly appealing, but also smell cool and dominant. Get your first bottle for 15% off with their No Shave November deal through the link in the description below, and allow you or your man's beard to finally say thank you. Now, back to the episode. Alright, on to the very first tweet of this episode. The lady that you saw dancing for kids in the hospital has landed an ambassadorial job and a 4-day trip to Zanzibar. Another lady who nicknamed the deputy president landed a job in the office of the deputy president. Then there's a man who mimics the deputy president but was unable to pay fees worth 10,000 bob. Men, you're alone. Okay, so I kind of think that it's true, but I don't want to approach it in a very pessimistic way, because the way it's been framed is a very pessimistic manner, which isn't entirely the case. I think to a certain degree, yes, she is saying the truth, but I don't think it's because men are alone. Because when I first saw this tweet, when I first actually sort of engaged with it and thought about it, it brought back quite a lot of memories. And of course, yes, there is quite a lot of truth that's said here, and I have experienced it firsthand, especially this year, and more so with IG, because there was a point in time when I was trying to grow myself, and I put in so much time, so much effort into trying to make funny content, something that would be very engaging, and I'd barely get anything, and a babe would literally go and post up a carousel with like 3, 4, 5 pictures of herself with a little bit of booty and a nice dress, and the likes would be great. She'd get like 50 extra followers a week and everything, and I'd barely even struggle to get to 10. So to think about it, yes, it does seem particularly true, but it's not the entire thing. Because I realized that being in the media and being profitable in the media actually sort of requires some things that guys might not be particularly well suited for. Because like, first of all, we have visual stimulation. Babes are by design visually stimulating, and babes will support other babes. So even though the picture doesn't look that great, there's some guy that will definitely look at the babe and be like, oh my goodness, she's beautiful. And at the same time, there's a bunch of other babes that for just about any picture, for any reel, they're like, oh my goodness, babes, you're so gorgeous, blah, blah, blah. Because of the whole empowerment and female support and shit, which kind of works. With a guy, you have to be at the extremes of interesting, funny, controversial, and so on for you to even get attention in the first place. Because not unless if you're doing something that is universally loved and praised, which can make it quite profitable, kind of like what David Moyer usually does with the dances for the birthdays and everything. For the most part, guys have to do like 10 times more work just to get the same kind of attention that a lot of females do on social media. And it's an unfortunate reality, but at the end of the day, because men aren't particularly made to be the most visually appealing people, and we're not particularly visually desired by other men, it means that the amount of support that we get is already a lot less than we probably already would want. So to a certain degree, it's sort of our fault, but it's also not our fault. Then at the same time, you kind of have to remember that female empowerment has actually played a pretty big part in a lot of these successes, because when you look at the idea that, the lady who was dancing for the kids in the hospital, on one end, there's the humanitarian appeal for it, because it's like, these kids are very disaffected, they're not in the best state. So this lady actually goes ahead and tries to make them happy, which is a great thing. Then on the other hand, it means that if you're doing something great for kids and there's NGOs that are into that shit, then you become like a good machine for them to use to propel their agenda and everything, which kind of does work in this lady's appeal. Now, of course, there is the fact that, bringing up women always seems like a much better thing to do publicly. So when you look at the lady who got the job just because she gave the deputy president the name Rigiji, like, you can kind of see where her being given a job had a certain level of public appeal to it, as opposed to the guy getting a job as well. Now, at the end of the day, women are going to be empowered by a lot of corporations and NGOs and shit, as opposed to guys, and we kind of have to accept that. The only thing is, for us as guys, I guess we're just gonna have to accept that being in the media space requires that, one, we do something that is mainstream positive so that we can make more money from it, and two, we make sure we are the absolute best at what it is that we do so that we can actually succeed. That's just my 2 cents on it. So I'd like your thoughts on what it is that we can do as guys as well. Now, all that said and done, I will leave it at that and I will move it on. So on to our very next tweet of this episode. Don't skip your whole phase. It'll come back and haunt you when you're married. So to be honest, I actually usually hate it when babes tell this to other babes, because it was actually a woman that tweeted this. The whole, don't skip out on your whole phase. Get into your whole phase. Go get some dick, blah, blah, blah. Like, I usually hate it when babes tell this to other babes. And I sort of have my reasons for it. And yes, why don't you hate it when guys tell it to other guys? I guess it's probably because I know why guys will tell other guys to go and get pussy after they've gotten out of a breakup. And it makes sense. There's a certain, restoration of your mate value that kind of comes in, which I can sort of understand as a guy. Because it's not that you're an unattractive person, that you've been dumped, you were dumped or you got out of the relationship because it just wasn't bad. So You go out there, you pull babes left, right, and center, and you assert your mate value by banging those babes. That makes a ton of sense. Now, of course, you can argue this out for guys on where it's good and where it's bad, but on the babes, like, I just see nothing but bad. And yes, maybe you might look at me as a misogynist of sorts, and that's entirely a you thing. But my issue is, women hold the keys to sex, and the demand for pussy is always going to be there. Like, not unless if you're in a party full of gay dudes, of which either way, there's definitely one dude there that's probably bi. So there is some level of demand for pussy. Like, when I think about it, when you're telling a babe who just got out of a relationship to go and bang a bunch of other dudes, it's like you're dropping her mate value even more by, one, increasing the number of bodies that she has on her record, of which, yes, it doesn't exist, but still, niggas can talk, and two, it does kind of decrease her ability to pair bond, which isn't a good thing. Like, there's the whole statistical research and everything about, over 10 bodies, the ability to pair bond, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, her ability to pair bond is a lot weaker than my ability to pair bond. So I can bang a lot more women than she can men before my ability to pair bond kind of goes away. But even though we were to throw my opinions and my thoughts on it away, the biggest problem with telling people to get into their whole phases or they'll regret it is that some people, actually quite a number of people, aren't built to be in the whole phase. Like, people usually talk about the whole phase today as though it's something that everyone has to go through. But the reality of it is, there's so many people that are not built for the whole phase. There are people that are only built to have attachments. There's some people that can pair bond and that's it. And there's people that can very easily detach their emotional side from, I guess, a more sexual side, which can allow them to sleep with more people. And that one's not even particularly exclusive to gender. Some babes can do it, some guys can do it, others can't. But the reality of it is, you can't assume that everyone can do the same exact thing. Like, I know a babe friend of mine who had pretty much gotten out of a relationship. She seemed to be having a pretty good thing with someone, but her female friends were busy telling her to go and bang more people. Or, you have to embrace your whole phase. You can't be getting into one relationship, then you get out, then you remain on dry spell, and then you get into another relationship. That's not how it works. And in my head, I'm like, what's wrong with that? Isn't that what people used to do back in the day, and they're still doing pretty okay? So the whole belief that the whole phase is this end all be all for people is something that I just don't like at all. But then again, like I said, opinions are like assholes, so I will leave it at that, and I will move it on to our very next tweet of this episode. When men refer to themselves as alpha males, I hear that in the context of software, where alpha versions are unstable, missing important features, filled with flaws, and not fit for the public. Okay, to a certain degree, I can get the kind of sense he's giving, but at the same time, this sounds like very toxic information, if I can put it that way, because the way you're making it seem is that alpha males are a particularly bad thing. Although I feel like, to some degree, alpha males are a part of the red pill movement, and they've sort of had their own roles, and they sort of helped shape different people along the way. Now, for those of y'all that don't kind of get it, like, the red pill movement is almost like feminism, in that there was like a first wave, a second, and a third, which we're in right now. So the first wave was more the pickup artistry, where guys were trying to show that they're good because of their ability to pick up babes. And a lot of guys who are in their 30s and 40s are kind of the people who went through this stage. Like, they would go out to clubs and they try to pick up babes and go home with them, and the more babes they picked up, the better they felt. Then the next sort of stage that came in is the whole self-improvement with like masculinity and dressing and looks kind of phase. This was where the alpha M's kind of came in. But now this third stage is where the Andrew Tates, the Fresh and Fits, the male podcasts are sort of coming in, where it's almost like they're doing a lot of bashing to women, but at the same time they're sort of saying that an alpha male is supposed to do this, if you don't do this you're a beta, blah blah blah. Of which I'm not saying that they're bad or it's a bad thing to be an alpha male. It's just that I think if you identify yourself as an alpha male, there's a certain level of growth that you're still left to sort of get into, because a guy that identifies himself as a beta is most probably very underconfident. The so-called alpha male will believe that they're confident even though they might be a little overconfident, because to a certain degree they are sort of the cubs that look up to the idea of being alpha as the lion, and that's what they're trying to be. And I guess the part where you grow into that lion, you stop trying to refer to yourself as an alpha of sorts, and you sort of become this confident person who's confident in who they are and what they can do, and is constantly trying to become better at being who they are. Now, that is, I guess, the level that alphas are left to sort of reach. And I guess you could say that yes, they are missing some important features and they do have their flaws, but saying that they're not fit for the public is not a particularly good thing to say. And that's kind of why I heavily disagree with what's been said here. Do they have room for growth? Yes. Are they a problem? It depends on what kind of alpha male is there and how they sort of look at it. But I will leave it at that and I will move it on. So on to our very final tweet of this episode. The way society views donkeys versus zebras is an example of how pretty privilege works. Okay, so I feel like I was probably the first to talk about pretty privilege on the internet, even though people didn't know about it. But either way, I'm glad that people sort of point it out. Now, for those of you all that don't know what pretty privilege is, it's essentially the unequal advantage that you get for being a good-looking person. That's the simplest way to sort of describe pretty privilege. And it is something that does affect both men and women, because, you know, guys can also have pretty privilege as well. And I believe it beats things like white privilege or the so-called male privilege that some people might say appeals to certain groups of people, because this is sort of a universal thing. Because the simplest way to sort of try and describe pretty privilege is think about this very fine babe in, say, an entry-level job, or, you know, in a fairly low-level career or a low-level workplace, who can pretty much end up marrying a super rich dude or being with a super top-tier dude simply because she's beautiful. And a lot of guys will go for the finest babes because they are the most beautiful, and they'll get a lot of passes for a lot of the shit that they'll do because they are beautiful. And that's a pretty good example, or at least the most clear-cut example of what pretty privilege is. You can sort of see pretty privilege in the office because an attractive person may not have to do all that much, but if the manager notices her or him, if, you know, the manager is gay or a woman, then they can also do the same thing and sort of upgrade them a lot more because they seem like they are doing a much better job, but it's simply the fact that they're more attractive and they can do the job well. Now, of course, all of those are upsides, and I guess that is what makes the whole thing about being pretty such a privilege. The fact that you can get stuff easier and you can move up faster simply because you are better looking. Even with guys in relationships, it works the same way. There's a lot of women that are supporting guys simply because they are very good looking. And maybe because they also have good dick along with them being good looking. But there are downsides that come with the whole pretty privilege thing that people never want to talk about. So, like, first of all, people think that beautiful people are dumb. Like, this has been familiarized with a lot of guys by virtue of the fact that trophy wives exist, and I guess a couple of influencers and socialites have sort of made it seem that way. Like, I'll give you a pretty clear example. I don't think Kim K is a particularly dumb person, but when you listen to her talk, you tend to think that the only thing that's helped her get ahead is her beauty. Which could be true, could be false, but either way, it's a thing. People will assume and think that beautiful people, good-looking people are often daft. On top of that, they'll also think that they're not very sociable and they can't be interesting people. So essentially, they're just boring people at its core. Then on top of that, there's a certain level of hate that you get for being a good-looking person. This one's mostly with women because women are mostly sort of having that visual appeal to guys. So if a woman realizes that this younger, possibly good-looking babe is getting promoted and not her, there's a certain level of hate that she can develop as well as her co-workers because they think that this good-looking person did not deserve the promotion simply because she is good-looking. Same thing with guys. But I tend to think that the biggest downside of pretty privilege is the fact that the people that benefit from pretty privilege don't have to do all that much work, and when their beauty, or at least their pretty privilege, goes, they actually end up sort of being very short-handed. So for example, if you end up upgrading or you end up being promoted to a different position, not necessarily because you're that good at your job, but because you are beautiful and the person above you sort of wanted to bring you up because they liked you, if you end up going to that, say, promoted department or a different department of sorts, and the person above you sort of changes to someone of the same gender who doesn't give a shit, or someone who just doesn't give a shit about you, you can end up stagnating or you can end up even moving lower, which doesn't really work in your favor, of course. And that's one of the problems that pretty privilege can give you. It can give you this false sense of capability and sort of cushion you from a lot of the downside of not being able to perform particularly well. This also applies in relationships, because a guy can chase you so hard because they want to be with you so badly, and after being with you for a particular level of time, once the whole, oh, you know, she's such a beautiful person sort of fades away, at some point you might end up overhearing that the guy is saying that the sex is boring and you don't perform, or banging ugly babes is better than banging finer babes. And they end up mistreating you because they wish that stuff was a hell of a lot better than it currently is. But at the end of the day, when this guy was chasing you, he believed that you were this end-all be-all because you were such a beautiful person. And it's a very unfortunate place to be, but it does exist for a lot of guys. So I guess if you're a particularly good-looking person and you have it good, always try to do way better than you think you can, because at the end of the day, you don't know if you're really having pretty privilege or not. Although, then again, I might be wrong or I might be giving very crappy advice, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On Twitter, it is at BagakaTheD. On Facebook, on IG, it is at Breaktime on Westside. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.